Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about Scavengers Reign episodes 3 and 4. So spoilers for the episodes. They're called The Wall and The Dream respectively. So this is a Patreon sponsored review. Thank you very much to Alison for picking the show. She decided to keep this one on until it was done, so I will be watching and reviewing all of the show in batches of 2 episodes at a time. So yeah, I talked a lot in the first 2 about the atmosphere, about the music, the animation and all that kind of thing. And some of the worries I had, some of the concerns I had about the plot maybe being a little bit of a roadblock after roadblock as they're trying to make their journey. And that's partially kind of still true for episodes 3 and 4. But what I will say is that the character development has definitely went up a little bit. Particularly in relation to Kamen, who's like the crazy guy who was on his own for a while. He's the one that's with the alien who's kind of like making him see things in his mind, and as we see in episodes 3 and 4, is using him as a hunter-gatherer to like kill other animals and bring it back to the alien so that he can feed, and then in return he feeds the black goop from his mouth back into Kamen. But as we see this playing out, there's a lot of good little character bits that kind of come through it. Episode 3, when he first tries to kill something that's up a tree, he fails, right? He slips, he doesn't quite get it, and he falls, and the alien has to save him once again by making him float before he lands, right? We saw that a couple of times in the first 2 episodes. Here, though, we see Kamen get angry, where he feels like a failure for not being able to do this, and this kind of coincides with a flashback to him working on the ship. We kind of get a little bit of more context about who he was on the ship, that he was this mechanic / engineer, and that he was responsible for fixing like a cooling system on the station. And seemingly, in the flashback, he gets very upset at Azzy, right? So we see some of the characters who have not seen meet in present day yet intermingle in the flashbacks, and he gets very frustrated and says he'll take care of it. And immediately, as soon as that scene played out, I was like, oh, this is interesting. It kind of feels like we're going to find out he's responsible for whatever's happened to the ship, right? Whatever reason they were in a disaster and they had to come down to this planet, it feels like he might be the one responsible. And I can't even stand here and get all hoity-toity with that prediction, because the end of episode 4 actually confirms that. Or by the end of episode 4, it's pretty set in stone that Kamen is the reason why any of this happened in the first place. And his insecurities are a big part of what's going on. I think there was a lot of sympathy for Kamen in the first 2 episodes even, just because he was on his own and he's like, oh, he's went stir crazy, but it's not really his fault. He's been isolated all this time. But the backstory that's presented to us here in these 2 episodes, and I think more importantly, how he reacts even in the present day story when he fails to kill something, it just makes him angry. And he's determined to kill it. Like, he gets kind of pissed off, and it really feels like he feels belittled or emasculated, and he has to act out, and he gets more violent. And over the course of the episode, he keeps bringing back larger and larger animals for the alien to feed on, and eventually it looks like he kills a bigger version of the one that he's helping, like the same species. It seems like he kills like a larger sized alien of the same kind. The alien he's serving still eats. So I think that type of like exploration of his character, and that's before we even get into the relationship that he was having, which was teased in 1 and 2, but we get how it relates to the ship and like their time in the ship in these 2 episodes. There's one flashback in episode 3 that shows where he convinces this woman to come on the ship with him, that she's a robotics engineer and there'll be a place for her. In fact, they actually neatly kind of tied all this together, because there was an earlier flashback in episode 3 where we saw Azzy talking to her about fixing the robot. So they kind of set that up earlier on in the episode, and we see him basically make this speech about, hey, we just need each other, we can be out there, there'll be a good job for you, and we can stay together. And she's not really sure. She wants to kind of not just give up her life on Earth. And that's kind of, but seemingly he convinces her. And then the flashbacks in episode 4 show that it doesn't go so well, that they're not very happy. She ultimately breaks it off while they're already on the ship, and he kind of takes it as a defeat and lashes out in his role and his job on the station, where he goes to Sam and tries to convince him, Sam being the other character that's on the planet with Ursula, and basically tries to say, hey, I couldn't fix this cooling system thing. We can't go the route that we were supposed to take to get to the colony. We have to go this more dangerous path that gets close to a sun. And Sam says, no, that's ridiculous. We cannot do that. It's not safe. That sun's unstable, whatever. And the end of the episode, the actual end of episode 4, is us seeing those moments where the sun itself near this planet is what causes the damage to the ship. And not only is it proving that it was a dangerous route, I'm also glossing over the fact here that we see Kamen go in behind Sam's back and program that route into the computer illegally when no one's around, right? I mean, well, there's like an ensign around who Kamen yells at, but like, you know, Sam's not there. He just sneakily does it anyway, and he's like trying to fix what he thinks he's trying to basically feel like he can solve the problem, and he thinks Sam's in his way. And again, it very much feels like an immature kind of mentality, like he has to lash out. And when Sam kind of finds out he's done this and confronts him about it, he kind of stands his ground and gets aggressive and angry. But interestingly, afterwards, he goes to his now ex-girlfriend and says, basically acts all nice about everything and says, hey, how's the new place doing? You've moved out, you're in your own quarters. And he's like, hey, you know, today you'd be proud of me. Like, I was in a tough corner and I stood up for myself and I feel good about it. And she's like, oh, that's great. I'm glad to hear that. But off you go. And he kind of, you know, he has that kind of thing where he's like, hey, like, if things keep going better and I like keep my head down, like maybe me and you can work things out. And she's like, yeah, well, yeah, we'll see. We can see. You know, it's very much he's still kind of clinging to this idea of this relationship that he convinced himself he was in. And he seemingly convinced her she was in it at a certain point, and that's why she got in the ship. But it's kind of fallen apart. So it feels like he and his insecurities that was kind of spanning out from, and it's not, this is not to say that I'm blaming his relationship troubles for everything he does. I think it's kind of an Ouroboros. It's like a snake eating its own tail, because his relationship troubles come from him being unhappy and unfulfilled at work and having a temper. And then those frustrations in the relationship then cause him to act out more at work. So it's very much, it's all him, right? It is all him, absolutely. But you can see that he is clinging to certain ideas, the way he's like going about it. So I thought all of this was good, right? And seeing him get more frustrated, his like present day plot in the planet in episode 4 is all about how he tries to kill this other thing, but there's a bigger monster there that just like hits him away and takes the corpse of the animal, and he has to go back empty-handed, and he feels again like he's failed, right? Emasculated. And he's thinking about these flashbacks, and they kind of motivate him to like make a spear, and he's like pissed. And you can sort of tell that everything he's doing is really unhealthy. Like all of his motivations for everything he's doing is really bad. Now, obviously we can talk about the ethics, or like, is it right what this alien's done to him to control him? But at the same time, it kind of feels like he's depending on this alien because this alien keeps giving him the thing that he's coming back for. It feels like an addiction. It feels like, in the same way he treated being with a woman in a proper relationship, he's doing the exact same thing with the alien in some ways, where he's just like achieving task and then coming for reward. And that's making him feel fulfilled. And when he fails to live up to the expectation, he gets angry again and he has to go out and try. So it feels like Kamen in many ways, like depending on where they go with him, he could just be the villain of this story. Like I could see him having confrontations with the rest of the crew when they all eventually start intertwining. But everything about this over the course of these 2 episodes, and I think it was his story that stuck out to me the most, of really fleshing out not just like the why they crashed and why they had to come down here, but more just the idea that it came from a place of human error, and not just that someone made a mistake, that someone acted in a, and like, it's not even so much out of malice. He didn't know that they were going to crash. He didn't believe that he was going to cause a problem, but he did dive into it despite other people saying why it's a bad idea. He was determined to try and prove himself, and he messed it up, seemingly like he messes up a lot of things, and it caused all this for everyone. And I don't think it's a coincidence that in the same episode, we see characters in other plot lines find dead bodies from the ship. Ursula and Sam find one of the other pods, right? And the three people who were on it are all dead. They all have like spikes and crystals coming out of their bodies. And it's a really somber moment. Sam's really upset about it, and like they have like a little burial, and it's a whole thing. And they talk about how this is his friends and how he knew them and all the rest of it. I don't think having that scene right around the same time, we're seeing that Kamen's responsible and that him acting selfishly to try and prove himself caused all this. Like, putting those scenes together is not an accident. It's pointing out the consequences aren't just for him. The consequences are for all these people that died. In fact, episode 4 or episode 3 even starts with like a shot of all the people who are still asleep on the ship now that it's landed, and the aliens are starting to come into the ship. So maybe representing as like a ticking clock until, you know, until like they have to get there, or you know, all these people on the sleeping pods might be in danger if the survivors can't get there in time. So I think that stuff is really good. Actually, I think over these 2 episodes, it kind of made me care a little bit more about the overall story that's going on beyond just the pretty planet and weird aliens. And there's still weird aliens. There's still tons of weird aliens throughout these 2 episodes. A lot of the plot in episode 3, because I would say that Kamen is the focus of 4 for the most part. All 3 like batches of characters get a decent amount. Don't get me wrong, but I would say 3 pivots a bit more towards Sam and Ursula, who all their stuff kind of revolves around this weird I don't know, I can't just keep saying alien. It's kind of like an aggressive big chicken with like a rib cage sticking out of his back. I don't even know how to describe it, but early on in the episode it sets up that they chase anything that has this yellow goo from these little pods from this plant on it. So there's these other smaller aliens that are sucking this goo, and these bird-like things come out and run away with them and take them away somewhere. So that's set up early on, and then later on in the episode, the ending, in fact, that happens to Sam, where he's taken, and the cliffhanger getting into episode 4 is that he has been taken into a tree and Ursula's left there. Now, what makes it quite compelling at the time, at that part of the episode, is that they've just had a bit of a fight where he has said he's tried to make a plea to her because he feels like he needs her. He even says that, you know, I can't do this without you. And she responds, I can do this without you. Which did feel mean. And I kind of appreciated that in the writing, they have the character, after a few seconds of awkward silence, try to apologize because she realizes just how awful that sounded. Because he gets pissed at her because like a big part of the middle of their plot in episode 3 is they're going through this structure of vines, we'll call it. But the vines kind of open up because they've got this like plume off one of the birds that kind of makes it separate and open up and whatever. And she has a whole moment. Ursula has this whole moment where she sees like a little bug spout from this flower or whatever you want to call it. And she sees this thing kind of like ignite like the start of a new life cycle or something like that, where he takes like one of the little glowing buds and he kind of like makes a little shape and this thing falls into it. I don't even know how to begin to describe all this. This is purely visual stuff that I think you just have to watch the episode for. But it's all very tranquil, with the possible exception of the fact that at the end of this, the little creature just withers away and dies. So there's very much like a life cycle thing. And I think that's the thing that's really coming across in all these episodes so far, is that all of the ecosystem is all kind of functioning together and they're all a part of it. And it feels like the robot's whole thing where it's starting to tap in. Levi, the robot, Levi tapping into all this, and that's like part of like he's like she's becoming part of the ecosystem. But anyway, she has this moment of like just peace, like watching this, and when she wants to talk about it after they get out, it makes Sam kind of pissed. Sam doesn't like that she's stopping to sightsee, it's getting off the objective, that kind of thing. And you know, I think this idea that he's all about the mission in his dead series, but at the same time, he kind of admits in episode 4 when she finds him eventually that he wouldn't be alive if it wasn't for her. Now, I suspect we might see some of these events and like when they were actually crashing, because this episode ends with the moment where they all kind of realize something's wrong on the ship. We see them all kind of like notice that the ship's had a bit of an impact, but none of them have quite grasped the severity of it at the end of this episode in the flashbacks. So I think some of these events that are being alluded to, where like, okay, why is Sam only alive because of Ursula? I'm sure we're going to see that. Like, how did she save him? Like, how did her quick thinking get them through a situation? How did Azzy end up with Levi? How did Kamen end up on his own? Like, I'm sure we're going to get those answers, but they just sort of tease the start of it at the end of this episode. But there's a whole thing where she has to climb the tree, and she ends up like getting herself kidnapped by one of the bird things intentionally. She grabs the yellow goop and rubs it all over so that this thing will grab her. And that stuff's fun enough. That's where some of the more like weird science fiction visuals come into it. And yeah, I don't really have too much to add to that. I guess the only other thing about those two that I would like to point out is that towards the start of episode 3, they have a conversation where he talks about how someone that he was on a mission with once got spooked because when they were on their way back to their camp, there was like a skull, like an animal skull left on the trail, and it really freaked him out, and he was convinced they were cursed or something like that. And a year later he died, and Sam's like bewildered by this, and he's like, hey, that guy like basically willed himself to death because he believed that death was coming, and then it happened. And Ursula points out that, you know, it may not have been real, but it was real to him, and sometimes that's important. So it does kind of feel like, you know, that leading into everything else that happens with them, with Sam getting pissed that she's like appreciating the beauty of this place. It does really paint Sam as a very logical, like going by the book type character, and has no time to appreciate like anything going on for its beauty or possibly its spiritual quality, if there's such a thing exists. You know, like, it feels like they're kind of painting the contrast between the characters, which kind of makes it more powerful that when by the end of episode 4 they've found, you know, the dead, because when she finds him up on top of this, like, because up on top of the tree there's like a sort of like whole flat land that the trees make, like this wall of branches kind of make a surface that you can walk on. And when she finds him, he's with this pod of the dead passengers from the ship, and all of their interactions and putting them to rest and burying them feels like it hits a little bit harder because they've pointed out how different these two characters are because of their conversations in episode 3, and then her like willing to like put herself in danger to go and rescue him, extra motivated by the fact that the last conversation they had, she kind of really hurt his feelings. I think all of that stuff made it a bit more compelling to sort of wrap up and like have her find him. And that leaves Azzy and Levi. They didn't get a whole ton in episode 3, I would say. The main set piece with them in episode 3 is when they notice that a lot of these little bug type things are hiding from something, and they detect tremors, and it turns out to be a stampede of like alien buffalo, we'll call them. Again, that doesn't quite fit the exact description. They have like big like external lungs that kind of like puff up. Maybe lungs isn't the right word, but like they have these big inflatable things that puff up on the outside. And yeah, they get caught in this stampede, and she's freaking out. Levi's on the back of the bike. It's a fun little sequence, mainly for where it goes at the end, where Levi kind of uses the fact that she's tapping in and understands this planet better, and she's able to talk Azzy through what to do, which is to just don't try and resist it, don't try and like escape the herd, just try and go with the flow of the stampede. Just try and weave like they are and just be a part of the cycle, right? If you imagine the stampede as like a flow of water, just be part of the current. Just be with them in the movement until it you know, it gets out or we get past them, but just go with the flow. And it ends up having this super like tranquil moment. There's a great like shot. The shot's maybe not even the right word, but shot looking down at them while she's kind of like in sort of zen mode, just riding with the alien buffalo. And the bike looks different, but she almost just blends in with all the creatures because it's just because the bike's just moving with them in their flow. It was kind of a nice little moment. Like, it was a good visual moment. It felt like, okay, we're not going to give as much meat to this character's plot this episode, so we're going to just give a really cool visual that's really memorable. And it does advance the story. It advances that idea that Levi is learning how this place works, and that just being a part of the ecosystem and just sort of adapting to it is better than trying to resist it, because that's just the way this planet is. I think that was a good moment. And then episode 4 for those characters, we get a lot more progression on Levi, because Levi, the start of the episode, has a dream. And it's clear that it's a dream, you know, interacting with Azzy, but there's things that are kind of off. At one point, Azzy's walking on Levi, but Levi's like really, really big. Like, and when I say big, we're talking kaiju sized, as if walking on her head kind of thing. So that immediately doesn't need an explanation. Like, I don't think, like, as soon as you realize, wait, Levi is dreaming, because it's a robot, I think it's pretty safe to assume for the audience that this is not something that's supposed to happen. Levi's not supposed to dream. And sure enough, throughout the episode, we get more of that, where when Azzy's like touching the goop that's inside, because we've been seeing through all the episodes that there's this yellow goop that's not the same goop that the birds were after in episode 3. That's different yellow goop that is, clinging to all the circuitry and all that stuff. And it's clearly what's evolving Levi into something else and making her part of the system. And she is like, hey, this looks pretty bad. I'm going to shut you down. But before she does that, she also, like, part of the reason why she's freaked out is because Levi says that it hurts when she tries to pull a part of it away and asks not to do that. So to test it, Azzy then starts kind of just sort of petting part of Levi's body, and she's like, that feels nice. And Azzy's like, it's not supposed to feel anything. You're a robot. You're not supposed to feel. This is weird. So she says, hey, I'm going to shut you down properly so I can open you up and actually take a look at everything. And she is trying to pick all this stuff out. It's, she's really going for it. And she ends up in a predicament. And this is actually a really cool scene. There's like a big alien that shows up with a giant, like, single tooth. It's like a big, not pincer, what's the word I'm looking for? But it's like a big poisonous looking single tooth. And it's dangerous because by the time it shows up, all these little sort of fluffy balls that are floating around, again, it sounds crazy to describe some of this stuff, they kind of like attach themselves to Azzy and paralyze her, right? It's like a, like, I don't know, like a numbing agent or something. But she ends up on the ground, barely able to move. And this other random alien creature that went down, we see what happens to it. Like, this big beast comes out, the tooth gets whipped out and just like crunches and like goes into this thing's head, and it's like super violent. And honestly, as far as tension goes, I think Azzy crawling, barely able to move, but just managing to crawl towards Levi's body so she can flip the switch to on so that Levi will get up and save her, is probably the best bit of tension the show's had so far. And it probably helps that I care a little bit more about the characters at this point. And I think the most touching part, obviously Levi does wake up and like get rid of the monster in the nick of time. It just kind of happens very quickly. But the most interesting part is that when she's back on her feet, Levi says, hey, can you not do that again? And she's like, what do you mean? Like, don't turn me off again. Like, when I'm awake and I'm connected to the planet, I feel things. I experience things. I am aware of things. And when you turned me off completely there was nothing. And basically Levi she never says the word, but she's basically saying, I was dead. For those few minutes that you had me turned off, I was dead. She never says that word, but that's effectively what she's describing. And that she doesn't want to be dead. Levi does not want to feel that nothingness ever again. Unless it was I think she says, unless it's a critical failure where you have to open me up. I never want to feel that again. And Azzy says, okay, I promise I'll never do it again. And that felt like a step forward for their relationship as well. But it feels like a big step forward and just kind of acknowledging that Levi's progressing beyond the regular machine at this point. So yeah, I mean, I thought that was really cool stuff. And then, like I said, the end of this episode is the flashback to the moment where the solar flare or whatever it is hits the ship and starts, the damage that is going to lead to their evacuation and being on this planet. So it's all Kamen's fault, and I can't wait to see, because I think before, because we never really saw the characters interact on the ship yet, I'm excited for Sam to run into Kamen again and realize that Kamen is responsible for all this. Like, Sam is going to want to kill him. Like, he is. Sam is going to want to wring his neck. And who knows how crazy Kamen's going to be by the time that occurrence happens, because he's been with this alien doing all sorts of things, killing creatures for his master. Like, there's a lot of potential in that interaction there. So I do think episodes 3 and 4 are better than episode 1 and 2. I really do. I think it's developed the characters enough that I'm a bit more invested in what they're doing and what the show is kind of talking about with them. I do think my critique, or my potential concern, that it was going to feel like a series of roadblocks to get to their destination, I do think that's still a little bit there invalid, just because I do feel like we didn't advance in that respect over these 2 episodes. It still just feels like they encountered random things. Not Kamen, actually. Kamen's kind of stationary and just doing things that's... Sorry, I almost fell over. He's just doing things that are his own plot. And it's not, he's not trying to get anywhere, so his plot doesn't feel like that. But the other 2 plots, they are trying to travel to the ship. And all the events that happen do feel like it's just a series of obstacles that are relatively random in a lot of ways. But it didn't feel that bad to me this couple of episodes, purely because, and especially in episode 4, I think I maybe felt it a little bit in episode 3, but because in episode 4 they'd spent time building tension between 2 characters, that being Ursula and Sam, when they had to pay that off in episode 4, I wasn't thinking about how we were progressing the plot to get to the ship. I was thinking about how we're mending this relationship and what these 2 actually mean to each other. Same goes for Azzy and Levi. And then all the Kamen stuff was just interesting because it was filling in pivotal backstory, and it was kind of really painting a picture of who this guy was. So the character work is kind of making that other concern not really be that big of a deal right now. And I'm very curious to see where we go with the next pair of episodes. But that is my thoughts on episodes 3 and 4 of Scavengers Reign. So if you've watched the show, let me know what you thought of these 2 episodes in the comments. Anything I happen to gloss over, please do. If you think it's important, please do to mention it. But that is me. So thank you very much for joining me. You can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. And of course, you can check out MailFuzz Movies, our other channel where all the movie podcasts live. I do recommend having a look over there. But that is me. So thank you very much for joining. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?